And joining us now in studio, here is Janice Stein, TVO's Foreign Affairs Analyst and Director of the Munk School of Global Affairs at the U of T. Welcome back, Janice. Nice to see you again. I want to start by reading something that Ronen Bergman, the Senior Political and Military Analyst for Yediot Ahronot, the Israeli newspaper, said last month. After speaking with many senior Israeli leaders and chiefs of the military and the intelligence, I have come to believe that Israel will indeed strike Iran in 2012. That's Mr. Bergman's conclusion, having been in touch with his sources. You're over there frequently. You're in touch with your sources. Agree or disagree?
I don't think the decision's been made. So I disagree with Bergman. He is extremely well connected, but I think there's actually a divided elite on this issue. Most of the senior military leaders and senior intelligence leaders are opposed, and some of them have gone public in an attempt to stop what they feel is their prime minister and minister of defense, Bibi Netanyahu and Ehud Barak, from rushing into an operation which they think would be disastrous for Israel to undertake. I think, on the other hand, that the prime minister in particular is absolutely fixated on the problem of Iran's getting a nuclear weapons program, and feels that there is a very short window of time.
Well, he has compared this to 1938 Nazi
Yes.
Germany, so we know where he's coming from on
Yes.
this. You say senior military leaders are opposed. What's their chief concern?
I think there are two concerns, really. The first is there's a sense that they don't really have the military capabilities to do this on their own. This is not a single surgical strike. Almost nothing ever is, but this is certainly not. It's repeated waves of bombing.
In 30 different locations.
In 30 different locations, Steve, over a 2 to 3 week period, in an action that would indubitably cause civilian casualties in Iran and inflame the region. So it's both a capabilities argument and a consequences argument.
Blowback, in other words.
Blowback.
Okay.
But you hear again from the Minister of Defense, Ehud Barak, as recently as yesterday, these consequences are being exaggerated, so he's in a public controversy with his own senior officials. 400 missiles we can absorb. So this is now an argument that's playing itself out in public in Israel.
Well, having said that, Barak was also quoted last month as having said that any attack on Iran was, quote, very far off. That sounds like someone trying to lower the temperature.
He did, and then there was a meeting of all the senior military and defense officials in the country in Herzliya. It's their annual security conference, and he made exactly the opposite statement. The window is closing. We have until June. That's all. So that's a statement that really elevated the temperature in the country again.
I got to tell you, though, and I suspect you're the same on this, we have been hearing for years that a strike on Iran by Israel, no mention of an American involvement, but by Israel, was quote unquote imminent. And I was there 6 months ago and heard that too.
Yes.
You know, if it was so imminent, surely it would have happened by now. What's going on?
Well, but you know, there are many, many people who feel that these repeated warnings of the imminence of Iraq, first of all, weaponizing its problem, which it has not done yet. There is no
to the best of our knowledge.
No, there's no intelligence agency that says that it has, nor are the UN inspectors saying that it has. So the issue really is twofold. What's the window? How far up the capability ladder do they go? Do they stop just short of the threshold that have the capacity to do it in 2 months? Because for Israel's decision makers, that would be a shrieking red siren. And secondly, are they burying the facility so deep underground, Steve, that they make the disruption of the program impossible? And it's actually the second, which Iran is now doing, which is it's a Russian roulette strategy, frankly. It's very, very risky because it forces those in Israel who are most worried about this and most inclined to take military action to feel that the window is in fact closing. If the Iranians, and so there's a risk here of a miscalculated collision, let me put it that way, which everybody should take very, very seriously in this whole discussion.
We do have to remember, though, that this is Israel, where the prime minister is in one party, his defense minister is in another party, his foreign minister may be in another party. The military leadership obviously comes from disparate views on this as well. How do we know whom to listen to on this?
Well, the daylight between the Minister of Defense and the Prime Minister is very, very thin. Barak, as you know, left the leadership of the Labour Party. He has a small faction. He really has cast his lot with the Prime Minister. So there's no daylight between the two of them. So the real divide...
But having said that, John Baird says something dumb, Stephen Harper can fire him, and that's the end of things. You can't do that in Israel. The government falls.
No, that's right. Yeah. Netanyahu's government would fall, but I think Barak has no political future without Netanyahu. Let me put it that way. Okay. The second issue, though, is he's encountering really fierce resistance from the senior military and intelligence leaders, and it's an open question whether even the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense in Israel can do this without the full support of the Chief of the Defense Staff. That would be an incredibly risky strategy. So what's going on, you asked earlier? What's going on clearly is a concerted attempt by Israel's government to ratchet up the pressure on the United States and the Europeans to tighten the sanctions, tighten the sanctions, tighten the sanctions, in the hope that they will dissuade the Iranian government.
Well, in fact, on Monday of this week, President Obama in the United States did just that. He said he was for tightening the sanctions. Why do you think the president has chosen this moment to do just that?
Well, I think there's, he's worried about what Israel will do. He has to pay attention to that. He does not want Israel to do this. And to be blunt about this, he particularly doesn't want Israel to do this before November, which is the U.S. presidential election. So he is buying time. The big problem here for Obama is managing Israel. That's what he's focused on, frankly.
That's very ironic. His big problem is managing his ally, not his enemy.
That's correct. Because there's no evidence that tightening the sanctions is actually going to dissuade the Iranian government from doing anything. The nuclear program, the non-weaponized nuclear program, has across-the-board support in Iran. So it's not this faction that supports it, the other one that doesn't. The big question is, do they cross that threshold and move toward weaponization? And clearly, as I said earlier, burying their centrifuges deep, deep underground sends an absolutely terrible message for anybody who's uncertain here.
Okay, but 3 of the 4 candidates running for the Republicans are avowing that they will not allow Iran to have nuclear weapons. Ron Paul is a special case in so many ways, and he's not said that. President Obama has said Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. But what can they really do?
I think there's a big difference between Obama on the one hand and the 3 Republican candidates. I think there's much less reluctance to use force. And if we think, as we do, that Israel doesn't really have an independent military option, the United States doing this alone without Israel, because were the United States going to do this, the last thing they actually need is Israel involved. They want Israel on the sidelines. The Prime Minister of Israel has to be waiting out that election in the hope that a Republican will win, because the strategic discussion changes dramatically were that to happen.
Well, how so? I mean, I know Romney has said, Iran's going to get a bomb if Obama gets reelected. I guarantee you that won't happen. He can't guarantee anything in this,
He cannot guarantee that Iran will not weaponize his program.
Right.
But I think there's no question that on the Republican side of the House, there's a much greater willingness to use force, and it's actually only the United States. And let's understand what the United States can do. The United States could retard this program by a few years. It would probably lead to a blockade of shipping in the Straits of Hormuz. The price of oil would go through the roof for a brief period.
Yeah, so how much of this is just campaign talk? They're running for a presidential nomination right now, so of course they're going to...
Some of it is, but again, I think for both Romney and certainly for Gingrich, but if we focus our attention largely on Romney at this point, there is a qualitative difference between him and Obama.
Let's read this from Richard Cohen in the Washington Post, who just a couple of days ago wrote the following. The Obama administration announced the Iranian attempt on a Saudi diplomat in Washington and then did nothing about it. Washington seems neither angry nor the least bit annoyed. This is a serious miscalculation, Cohen writes. Reasonableness gone amok. The lesson for Iran is stall and prevaricate because Washington lacks the stomach to be ugly. You agree?
Again, I don't think there is no real military option that can deny Iran a nuclear weapon if it chooses to pursue it. What can happen is a strike by the United States, which would delay it, but it can't deny it. And the costs, and I think that's what the Obama administration is focused on, the costs, both economic costs of doing this because of oil, and the political costs, because it's not difficult to imagine that Iran would use some of its allies as assets really to set on fire different parts of the Middle East. This is a very serious decision, Steve, and very dangerous.
We're operating under the assumption that whatever response is going to take place from either America or Israel will involve planes in the sky dropping bombs.
Yes.
There's another mission that's, and we don't know who's doing it, but you know, they're picking off Iranian nuclear scientists and assassinating them right now.
Yes, they are. And there's computer viruses, and there's a whole heap of parts. That slows it down, but just like a military option, one could say even more strongly about this. This may slow it down. It will not ultimately be effective should Ayatollah Khomeini decide that he's going to move from a nuclear program to a weapon. That decision hasn't been made in Iran either. So what we're really, this is a very dangerous game of chicken, international chicken, that's going on. The Iranians have not made their decision. Israel's not made its decision, and Obama's looking at this with something approaching horror.
Well, okay, we've talked about what the Israelis think, we've talked about what the Americans think, let's talk about what the Iranians think. They're looking at this play out. I mean, I know you don't have deep links into the mullahs, but you know, what are the kinds of conversations that are going on there, do you suspect?
I think that we have to be appropriately modest here. The only good intelligence, really reliable intelligence we have about Iran comes from the IAEA inspectors, the inspectors who go in as part of the International Atomic Energy Agency. They were just there. They didn't get a lot of cooperation, and they declared their last mission a failure. They're going back. But what are they getting? The last time, the Iranians refused to let them inspect those installations that the IAEA thinks are most likely to be advanced with respect to a weaponization program. So what do we know? We know they are moving down a road which is difficult to reconcile with a peaceful nuclear program. And we have an unambiguous report from the IAEA, which also says the final decision has not yet been made. I think, so that's on the capability side. On the intention side, not dissimilar from what I said about Israel, there are probably 2 or 3 people who will ultimately make this decision. I think that they too understand that this is a very dangerous decision. It hasn't been made yet, but if they look out, Steve, and they look at what happened to Muammar Gaddafi, had he had nuclear weapons,
there's no way NATO would have invaded.
He would be alive and in power today.
So the incentive is get him fast.
Yes.
Huh. If you watch the American election campaign in its full glory right now, you get the sense that Iran, listening to them, is responding with incredible bellicosity. Is that in fact the case?
The Iranian regime is really being squeezed and will be even more squeezed, and is being squeezed in an interesting way. They're fundamentally shutting down the capacity of the Iranian central bank to transfer money, and almost any Iranian now who tries to move money out of the country, even from private banks, is coming under suspicion. I don't know if you've ever transferred money from abroad to your account, but there's something called the SWIFT code that your bank has, which is part of an international network of access codes. They're going to move to deny Iran participation in that. So the economic cost is rising very rapidly. The middle class is feeling the pinch, and they're hoping to ratchet up the pressure over the next 3 or 4 months to such a degree. Now, that only works if you actually start some back-channel negotiations. And that's, I think, the missing piece in this whole conversation.
There are none.
They're not. There are some, particularly what we would call track 2 negotiations or parallel negotiations that are going on. But those negotiations really have to move. Sanctions alone will not do this.
Okay.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.